I think it's a great time to be interested in the dairy industry and being a part of it as it continues to evolve and change and certainly new challenges coming with environmental pressures and societal pressures on animal welfare and well-being. So I think there's new opportunities as well as the more traditional opportunities that have existed for a while.
Good day and welcome to the Dairy Podcast Show. It's a pleasure today to have Professor of Animal Science, Dr. Jim Drackley from the University of Illinois here with us today. And Jim has a long career and noted background in the dairy industry, working in a number of different areas. Certainly very well recognized for his work in nutrition, certainly the transition cow, and also the calf feeding. So, Jim, welcome today.
Thank you, Mark.
Pleasure to have you. So, if you can give a bit of a background of where you started in the dairy industry and how you got to what you're working on today with your role in the university.
So, I grew up on a small dairy farm, very small dairy farm in Minnesota. Kind of got involved in the dairy industry that way. Had a small herd of Guernsey cattle actually with my brother, and kind of gradually moved out of that as I went to college and then on into graduate school at South Dakota State University, and then on for my PhD at Iowa State. After that, I had the chance to join the faculty at the University of Illinois, and I've been there ever since. It's been over about 34 years now. So the role has been research and teaching, and also doing a lot of interaction with the industry through speaking and consulting and so on. So I've really had an exciting career, have the good fortune to be able to see dairy farms around the world. And that's been a great experience. And it's interesting to me that dairy cows are the same wherever you are in the world. And the farmers are the same too. It's just differences in culture and the local characteristics, but there's a lot of commonality around the world in the dairy industry.
Now, it's great to hear you say that. We often, as we work internationally, sometimes producers will comment, well, that won't work here or what have you. And certainly there are geographic and obviously temperature, climate differences, but I always say the cow is the cow. She's not a Chinese cow or a Mexican cow or an Italian cow. She's a Holstein, and probably this will work the same way.
Yeah, that's right. That's what we've found. Certainly, a lot of the same practices that we've been working on here seem to work just as well in other parts of the world, and things that we bring back from somewhere else should work here as well. It's just trying to fit it into the local system and make the management work.
Well, thanks, Jim. Given this background, at the university, what split of your time, I'm sure that's evolved over the time, has been teaching and working directly with the students, and then research?
Yeah, so my official appointment is 75% research, but I think it's evolved more now to where it's probably a little closer to 50-50 teaching and research. So I teach part of an undergraduate ruminant nutrition class, and I teach the lactation biology class, and then a part of a graduate nutrition protein and energy class as well. So it's a fairly even split of my time, I think, now between research activities and teaching.
So I know we likely have some young folks out there still in the university or looking at maybe postgraduate education. Before we get into some of your specific cow topics, if you will, what would be a word of wisdom to the younger generation there that are preparing for their career in dairy? You've certainly seen an evolution of young people for more than 30 years. That's an amazing perspective from an educator standpoint.
Well, I think it's a really exciting time to be coming into agriculture in general. We've talked about the demographics and so on, the expanding world population, and the need to increase food production so dramatically over the next 30 to 40 years. So I think it's a pretty wide open time in terms of opportunity. The dairy industry is continuing to change and consolidate, but I think there's going to be a turnover of some of us older folks here in the next few years, and a lot of room in the industry for young people to come in and make their own careers. So I think it's a good time. There's jobs available. I think it's a great time to be interested in the dairy industry and being a part of it as it continues to evolve and change, and certainly new challenges coming with environmental pressures and societal pressures on animal welfare and well-being. So I think there's new opportunities as well as the more traditional opportunities that have existed for a while.
So it sounds like adaptability to change is a real important. I mean, for not only for young folks, for those on the other end of our career also, but being relevant in any industry, but specifically the dairy industry certainly requires that need to be able to change.
Yeah, that's one thing. We can't teach our students the specifics of a job that they're going to go into, but we try to teach them to be well-rounded and able to learn and continue to learn and change and adapt over their careers. So I think the ones that are able to do that will have a long career and a successful and rewarding career in the dairy industry.
Well, thanks for those comments on the education side, Jim. We caught up briefly this morning before we connected, and as I mentioned, your publications, your career is well noted in the industry. But maybe let's start with transition cows. Over the years, there's obviously been a huge change and shift from the philosophy when I first started in dairy practice and nutrition of a steam up ration, and then controlled energy, low energy. What are some of the things that you've worked on and that you're currently working on that would bring some current and new recommendations to those folks feeding cattle?
Yeah, well, as you say, when I first started out in my research career, it was the conventional wisdom was to use the steam up approach before calving. Our research, we got into it kind of in a backdoor way. We were interested at the time in whether we could add some body condition to cows who were generally thin at that time. So we looked at increasing energy intake during the dry period to see if we could restore some body condition, and actually found that the cows that we unintentionally restricted quite a bit in nutrient intake did the best, had the least fat accumulation in their liver and so on. So we, through subsequent experiments, had defined that it was controlling the energy intake that was the positive factor there. So that's kind of evolved into the Goldilocks idea of the high straw rations. And I think that, the kind of the take home message from our years of research is that we want to be really careful about getting energy intake down, particularly in the far off dry period, to enable a steam up approach to work. With our larger farms and corn silage as the dominant forage, it's very easy to overfeed energy to cows during the dry period. And our research, as well as from a number of groups now around the world, is pretty clear that excessive energy in the far off dry period kind of predisposes the cow to a lot of metabolic changes that we think are unfavorable after calving. So making them more prone to ketosis, fatty liver, and subsequent diseases that will occur from those types of predisposing factors. So that's been I think the real key contribution that we've made is identifying that overfeeding of energy as a real risk factor for problems after calving.
So, certainly, believe there's still a bit, that information has gotten into the industry, but there's still a bit of a misconception of the ideal body condition score at dry off. And, as there's more research in this area, especially a number of groups looking at the high fertility cycle and, those cows that dry off at a more controlled body condition and don't have that body condition score change post calving are healthier and therefore breed back quicker and have another lactation. But just around some of the specific recommendations for body condition, I think it'd be useful to potentially share with the audience here, as there's still that concept that we maybe in plenty of herds we still see cows that would be over conditioned at dry off or during that transition period.
Yeah, I think that's it's kind of coming together now with the idea of the high fertility cycle, that we want to have cows dry off and calve at about a 3.0 condition score on a 5-point scale. Certainly a little thinner than we used to think about, but there's been some good work from Phil Garnsworthy in England that showed that cows, if they gain body condition before calving, they will lose that after calving. And regardless of where they go into the lactation, they kind of come down to the same body condition score at about 12 to 16 weeks into lactation. So it's very clear now that if we add body condition, cows have more body condition coming into calving, that they're going to lose that body condition in early lactation. The excessive rates of body condition loss certainly are negatively correlated with reproduction and good fertility. So there's really no good reason to have that extra body condition. It doesn't benefit milk production, and the cows are just going to lose it. It goes into milk fat production in the very early period. So one of the misconceptions I think that people have gotten into is that, my cows are going to lose that body condition after calving, so I should put more on. And so they like to have a heavier cow at calving. But again, if the condition score or condition is there, the cows are going to lose it. And that's going to contribute to metabolic problems and the suboptimal reproductive success. So I think the idea of calving cows at a bit thinner body condition score, not having them lose as much, or even there's been some recent trials that have shown that some cows actually gain body condition over the first few weeks of calving, and that fertility then is much improved, and we get into a more sustainable cycle where we don't have cows losing excessive body condition, becoming really thin, and then not breeding back. And then those cows are more likely to become over-conditioned then due to the long calving interval. So, the best solution seems to be to work to calve cows at about a 3 condition score. They'll maybe lose up to a half a condition score unit in early lactation, but then enables them to still breed back and maintain that calving interval, so we don't deal with fat cows at the end of lactation.
Yeah, and certainly we would see more of that shift overall, but I think in the industry still a lot of opportunity there to educate the producers and some nutritionists, because again that three for a lot of folks is just that's a thin cow going into dry period when really that should be the ideal athlete of a cow that we want to see. Jim, you're doing some work in the area of in the past and currently feeding amino acids, and certainly I always look back as I speak to students and younger folks and say, gee, when I first started doing some nutrition work in dairy as a young veterinarian, the forage analysis report was maybe a half or or 3/4 of a page at most, and the font just got smaller and smaller, and we have more and more parameters that we can evaluate. As that's transitioned, obviously the ability to balance for amino acids and more precision feeding. So what are some of your current research projects, and then within that, some of the recommendations as we look to fine tuning, protein feeding, if you will.
Yeah. So we've done several studies in our group, my colleagues and I, with feeding amino acids before calving in the close-up period. And research is pretty clear that supplementing methionine, trying to balance methionine to obtain a lysine to methionine ratio of about even as low as 2.6 to 1 really seems to benefit the cows, not only in terms of intake and production, but some of the metabolic outcomes, antioxidant functions, and so on that we think are pretty important in that transition cow. Currently, we're working on a project to look at amino acid supplementation in the fresh cow ration, looking at both methionine and lysine supplementation and the ratios between methionine and lysine in the fresh cow. It's our hypothesis that the lysine supply in particular really drives cows towards peak milk very early in lactation. And so we're looking at that lysine and methionine effect on milk production and other various metabolic and inflammatory functions and so on. That's kind of where our current focus is.
Okay. And Jim, when you say other functions, maybe an opportunity to explore that a little bit more. Colostrum quantity obviously comes up in lots of different discussions, colostrum quality, and then the long-term effects on the calves. We know that heat stress, for example, in the dry period can negatively affect that calf and that calf's future calves. So lots of interrelationships here. What are some of the other, milk production pays for that product, and we need to demonstrate that it's economical. But what are some of the other areas, including immune health, inflammation, that you're investigating?
Yeah. So my colleague Juan Lohr has shown in a couple of experiments that calves born to mothers that were supplemented with methionine actually had greater growth rates during the first 8 weeks after birth than the calves from non-supplemented mothers. So we think there's some epigenetic effects that are working there with increased or improved methionine supply and changing some of the functions, the gene expression, and so on of the calves before calving that impacts their growth performance after calving. We have quite a bit of information accumulating on the reproductive effects of amino acid supplementation as well. My other colleague, Phil Cardoso, has shown some benefits in uterine structure and function. And a study at Wisconsin showed improvements in reproductive efficiency from amino acid supplementation. So certainly there's that side. And then, as I mentioned, there's a whole area that we're exploring related to inflammation and the antioxidant roles of methionine through glutathione formation and some of the positive impacts on the immune system as well. So it seems to be a very critical amino acid, not just for its role in milk protein synthesis, but in synthesis of various other compounds and pathways that are important in getting that cow off to a good start and enabling reproduction to return as well. Pretty exciting area.
So and that's those are all really exciting areas, I think, as we look at the ability to fine tune feeding from the economic side, but then in the same process, improving production, improving fertility, improving long-term outcomes. Jim, in your research and your projects, Obviously over the years you've come across products and technologies that have a benefit, those that are neutral, and those that perhaps maybe even are detrimental, i.e., having fat cows. What are some of the things you do from the economic modeling side of okay, this product works, but now we need to look at the economics of feeding this? Can you give the audience a little overview, and also the importance of that, right? Yeah, biologically it works, but what are the economics of related to this recommendation?
Right. Certainly, there's a lot of different products aimed at the transition period, and a lot of them have pretty good data backing them up. But again, if we used all of them, it would make the ration prohibitively expensive to feed. So,
And the cow would be making 120 pounds of milk, right? Is the joke, right? The additive effect of all these products.
right, that's right. Um, so some of the things that we've looked at, choline is a product that we've tested a couple times, and not in our experiments not showed a positive effect, but certainly there's a pretty good body of research showing that choline has benefits to the transition. And again, that's a fairly expensive product, but in herds that are struggling with metabolic disorders and so on after calving, it can have a role. The amino acids, we're trying to get people to think of them not as additives, but as nutrients that need to be balanced for. So I kind of put them in a nutrition side that certainly we want to be balancing for amino acids. Um, Other things we've looked at include chelated minerals, and certainly we feel that they have a role in trace mineral nutrition during the transition. Um, the DCAD balancing has returned in emphasis, I think, over the last few years, kind of swung out of favor a little bit. I think, like a lot of things, people tinker with the application and don't always follow a strict protocol on something like the DCAD management. And I think some of the work that's come across here in the last few years has brought back just how efficacious the balancing for or DCAD can be in preventing hypocalcemia and the related problems. But it is a protocol that has to be implemented appropriately, and that includes monitoring pH weekly. So, if producers are not going to dedicate the time and labor to being able to document or follow, make sure that the program is working, then it's probably not going to be successful for them. Oh gosh, what else? Yeah, I mean, those are the main compounds that we've dealt with over the years. Yeast culture we've looked at in an older experiment and with some positive effects on intake and production. Um, yeah, I think those are the main ones that we've worked on.
So, Jim, it's obvious, if you query your publications, then it's obvious. But just from our discussion here, your list of from chelated minerals, amino acids, to just managing energy and body condition, a very well versed career, and continued in research of that transition cow. It really sounds like certainly new and innovative technologies, but and some feeding strategies, but really just then also the getting back to the basics and just making sure you feed that cow correctly and manage her body condition, and then the rest all comes naturally, if you will, the fertility, the milk, and so forth. And I think that's what perhaps I see is the ability to, in those herds that have reached that high end potential and got all the basics dialed in, then some of these other strategies then become the next place to investigate, right? But if you don't have those things in place, perhaps amino acid balancing is going to be not the bottleneck on your farm. It's getting everything else right so that you can see the benefit the economic benefit and the production benefit from these strategies.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We need to get those basics in place first before we worry about fine tuning.
So then going to the young animal, some of your work is in that young calf, that milk fed calf. Obviously, also lots of transition. The joke was that calf feeding, certainly 20 years ago came in a bag. It was whatever was in the bag. And I recall when a bunch of the manufacturers just made the cup bigger, and lots of producers didn't know, and all of a sudden they were feeding more total solids because the cup got bigger. We've transitioned from that hugely to ration balancing programs that have calf models and fine tuning calf feeding and calf starters. What are some of your recommendations and current research in the calf area?
Yeah. So we were involved many years ago in introduction of the idea of accelerated calf feeding, and that's kind of morphed now into just more solids feeding in general. And I think if we look at the last NOMS survey, the average intake was about the average intake of solids was about 560 grams per day, so a pound and a little more than a pound and a quarter of solids per day. So the average has moved up, which means that a lot of people are feeding more than that. And I think the average liquid amount that was being fed was about 5.7 liters per day, or 5.7 quarts roughly. So we are seeing more solids being fed, and I think that's certainly the move in the right direction. We need to remember that calf is a functioning monogastric at birth, designed to use milk solids, and there's a huge growth potential in that first 2 or 3 weeks that we're historically haven't taken advantage of. And I think a lot of producers are seeing that now in terms of what their calves look like when they feed more milk, and the long-term benefits in a better heifer, a better cow that result from that better early nutrition. It's not just the growth rate, but again, there's a period after birth when the calf is still developmentally plastic, where it can be shaped, and the long-term performance of that animal can be impacted by the plane of nutrition there in the first 4 weeks of life or so. So I think that we are seeing much more in the industry now. It's been kind of gratifying just the last 5 years even, the change in producers feeding more milk. So then that leads into the strategies of how to wean and prepare the rumen. And there's been a lot of good work coming out of University of Guelph and some other places looking at kind of the transition and when should we wean. When you and I were in school, the early weaning pressure was still very much in vogue, and now we see producers lengthening the time of milk feeding, weaning later, which makes that weaning transition much easier. And I think that in particular, if we're going to feed large amounts of milk, so 6 to 8 liters per day, the extending the weaning period over 2 to 3 weeks instead of abrupt or even over 1 week has been very successful, and not weaning until 8 or 9 weeks of age, which again, is a huge shift from kind of the push that existed 20 years ago for very early weaning. Starter formulation is another big area. The feed manufacturers have kind of had the corner on that market, but there's been some more recent research that kind of gets back to basics on that, and looking at possible shifts in starter formulation that may be more in line with what the calf is naturally prepared to do. So quite a bit of excitement and still room to make some improvements yet in the way we raise early young calves.
Can you comment a bit? I think one area that's still lots of room for change from what we would see would be some of the starch levels in calf starters. There's still plenty of room in all the areas, but I think fine tuning the milk feeding volume, solids, and so forth is certainly in the right direction. But I guess we still see some folks challenging the recommendations of some of the older formulations, very high in starch for these young calves.
Yeah, I think it's unusual that we've kind of grown accustomed to starch levels in calf starters that are 35% or sometimes even higher, and none of us, I think, would feed that level of starch to a lactating cow, much less a baby calf with an undeveloped rumen. So I think there's been some pretty good work. Mike Van Amberg, for example, at Cornell has looked at some alternative formulations that are maybe in the mid 20s for starch and more digestible fiber, high sugar. And if we think about the way that a calf would wean naturally if it was with its mother on grass, it would have intakes of a very highly digestible, lush grass, so very digestible fiber, a lot of sugar. Sugar ferments to butyric acid, which is the major driver of rumen papillae development in the rumen. So, some of those shifts to high sugar, lower starch, more digestible and soluble fibers, I think are real positives, and we need to continue to examine that as a way to get calves on a better plane of dry feed intake early in life, and help make that weaning process a little bit smoother. I think that's an area of real opportunity yet.
Yeah, I would agree. Also, as we work with our client groups, we certainly see more of the range, and I think that's really interesting when we look at perhaps balancing lactating diets. You can go across various geographic areas, and obviously there's ingredient differences and some nutrient profile differences. But if you look across the industry in general, feeding the adult cow and even the dry cow, transition cow, is fairly similar, with some variation, obviously. But if you look across the industry in terms of calf feeding, it's really such a variation in terms of really a low cost feeding calves, low volumes of milk, and getting onto a starter intake really quickly to, as you said, perhaps maybe even changing to 8+ week weaning, gradual weaning, and so forth. So I guess I always tend to think when there's lots of variation, either the industry's lagging or we don't quite have all the information to make the final recommendation.
Right. There's a lot of ways to feed a calf. Obviously, the early weaning and limited milk intake programs can be successful. Good producers have been making those work for many years, but the question has become, what are we leaving on the table by growing calves that way, rather than feeding them a little bit more in the way that nature intended them to be fed.
Yeah, and then certainly, again, back to those economics, I believe the data is very clear. More than 10+ trials looking at the future milk, right? So hopefully we have health and development of the immune system and so forth. But I think that's the economic driver. Okay, these animals are more productive. So continued as we look into future research, really fine tuning all of those areas and where the economic benefit is. Well, Jim, certainly discussion here, we can probably create 5 or 6 more podcasts on any one of those topics to dig into further mineral balance, transition rations, energy balance, what have you, calf feeding, and amino acids. So lots of different strategies that can be utilized. Some obviously are solid recommendations. Others are things that are still to come, research and knowing what future opportunities are. So encourage the audience to stay tuned. Certainly Journal of Dairy Science and other publications, and looking for that data to be available to actually make practical changes on the dairy based on that information.
It's time for our famous three.
Maximize profitability and herd health with early detection in animal health, reproduction, calving, and feeding. The most advanced bolus technology and professional support from agricultural experts makes this possible. SMAX Tech, the health system that future-proofs your operation.
Evonik stands for a holistic and sustainable value proposition for livestock production. It combines products and services and leverages digital solutions. This is all backed with high-value consultancy and deep customer understanding. Evonik turns science-based efficient nutrition, sustainable healthy nutrition, and precision livestock farming into value for customers and consumers.
DSM strives to bring our customers efficient, profitable dairy solutions. From essential vitamins like HYD and Victus Transition to next-generation products like Biofix, our portfolio is growing as we continue to bring innovation to the dairy industry. Visit dsm.com to learn more about our newest solutions.
And Jim, you've obviously had lots of opportunity, as you mentioned, to travel and and present around the world and visit lots of farms. Day to day for you, what would be a resource to recommend? We know of publication lag a lot of times. What's happening at the university today, unless you're maybe presenting it or one of your graduate students, maybe doesn't get to the end producer as timely as we'd like. Sometimes it's actually years before that gets published in Journal of Dairy Science and maybe picked up by some of the lay press, you will, or magazines. So what's a recommendation to these folks about how to stay on top of what's new in the dairy industry?
Yeah, I think one of the resources that is really valuable is the regional nutrition conferences. For example, the 4-state program, which is here in Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, or the Tri-State, or the Cornell Nutrition Conference. A lot of us tend to present our most current research that may not be published in a scientific journal yet at those conferences. And a way to keep track of that is SPAC, which is a service provided by the American Dairy Science Association that catalogs and allows a searchable, the title stands for Searchable Proceedings of Animal Science Conferences. So that's a way that people can stay in tune with the most recent research being presented at those nutrition conferences and other meetings. I think the lay press does a pretty good job. Progressive Dairyman, Dairy Today, Hordes Dairyman, those types of publications still get information out relatively quickly as well. So that and, the websites for various universities often contain more extension type publications or recent publications that can help people stay in touch as well.
Great. No, those are some excellent recommendations, and certainly I know that the internet alone has just changed the ability to what young folks maybe don't realize often is not having Google at your fingertips, right? Having to go to a university library or there was no online to search. It's amazing how we actually got by in those times. And then perhaps maybe when you're not connected and working and reading scientific literature, is there something recently just to encourage some folks to read. I actually just got by Amazon. My good colleague Pete Ostrom recommended a book on trails and exploration. I'm really into hiking and backpacking, so I'm anxious to maybe disconnect a little bit and read. But anything you can offer the listeners here?
Well, I enjoy fishing, and I'm a model railroad nut, so I like to read about model railroads, and I do enjoy reading. I like good spy mysteries. I haven't read one recently. I just haven't had the time, but I'd encourage everyone to do have some downtime where they're not thinking about cows, and to explore something that's also of interest to them.
No, that's a good point, and I think what I always try to do is I think a lot of those you know outside of dairy things we do, whatever it may be, bring us back to dairy or we can relate to. And I always joke when folks say a spy or a mystery. Really, that's kind of what we do. How many days on the dairy, right? Milk is down, calves are sick. You use some of those same strategies to problem solve on the dairy. You're really an investigator, and maybe it's not a murder, but you're trying to figure out why calves are scouring or fat is not where you want it. So
Yeah, very very true. It's a good analogy.
and then Jim, you've seen the industry for many years now, as we've mentioned, and uh, a unique opportunity to then give some comments. What keeps a dairy producer relevant in the industry and longevity in the industry?
Yeah, I think if you look at different farms, the key is management skill, and that's very hard to define, but it's one of those things you kind of know when you see it, because of the attention to detail, and just establishing systems, protocols that they and their employees follow on a day-to-day basis, that keep that variation small, keep the variation within tolerances. And I think it's those producers that are able to put everything together and manage all the different areas that need to be taken care of every day with a defined system. They're not letting things fall through the cracks. They take care of problems when they arise. So I think that's you can see it all around the world, and you can see farms that have it and farms that don't have it.
So I think unlike us that like variety, keep the cow bored and consistent, right? Same exact thing every day, and
They love consistency.
so Jim, it's been a real pleasure to have you here today, Friday. So obviously these will get released at a various point in time, but enjoy the weekend as spring is coming, and lots of our colder climate areas are finally getting to enjoy the spring-like weather. I'd say to our listeners, most of you are probably familiar with Dr. Drackley's work. But if you aren't, certainly just Google the name and some keywords, and you'll come up with a plethora of great reading and practical recommendations. And again, I think that's the take home here is, as we do these podcasts, is that what can you actually maybe do today or tomorrow to make a difference on the dairy for either your own dairy or your dairy clients and customers that you're working with. So with that, Jim, again, thanks for taking the time today, and certainly we'll probably have you back again, because your continued research obviously is going to highlight some newer recommendations in the near future.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark. It's been a pleasure.
Take care.